Our friends at Detroit Boxing Company are dedicated to providing high-quality boxing apparel. With fighters and fight fans in mind, their designs are unique and stylish. With their hats, shirts, hoodies, jackets, they are going to make your jab cross hook look even more sexy. They have great classic t-shirts that feature some of boxing's biggest legends. Tommy Hearns, James Tooney, Jimmy Paul, and more. The people behind this company are simply wonderful, and they truly care about the boxing community. You have to check out their website at DetroitBoxingCompany.com and see the full catalog of all the great stuff they have available. Scoop up some fresh gear and just make sure you use the code word CoryCast at checkout, and you're going to save yourself a little bit of money. Check out their Instagram page at Detroit Boxing Company and hit that follow button. Just let them know that Cory sent you. Hey, sorry it's been a while since the latest episode of the Cory Cast. My wife and I were in the process of moving, and time escaped away from me. But we are back with our regular every other Friday schedule, starting with my guest, my old friend from high school, Jason Tuori. Jason is a very talented physical therapist and super intelligent. What I learned from him was just how much physical therapists do on a day-to-day basis, and just how important they are to people's lives and athletes' lives, really, for recovery and health. One thing I've always appreciated about Jason in his field of medicine, he is constantly looking at new numbers, new research to help him further help his clients in need. And I really appreciate that about Jason. He's super intelligent, super nice, and he's really freaking personable. Like, I love talking to him. I feel like I could have talked to him for another few hours. But hey, good to see everybody back again. I can't wait to show you this episode with my friend Jason Tuori. First of all, I just want to say thanks for doing this. This is really cool. I haven't talked to you in a long time, and it seems like your life path has been all over the place, which is really cool.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, thanks a lot for the invite here. It has been a while, so we've got a lot to catch up on.
You have been a physical therapist for, at least that's from last I had spoke to you, you were going to school for physical therapy. So that's kind of what you're doing right now?
Yep. So I've been a PT since 2017. This past year, I took my first full-time job that's not in PT, but it's in kind of an adjacent field. I'm sure we'll go down that a bit, but with that, I still have kind of like a private practice that I do remotely from a just strictly rehab consulting standpoint. And as we were talking about before, I also dabble in the podcasts. I have a PT podcast, kind of like journal club based podcast that I host.
Yeah, you had said it's like super niche, right? But like,
yeah.
That's the nice thing about podcasts, though, dude. Like, you can. I was saying, I was telling a group of agents the other day, like, you can literally find any hobby that you're into. There's a sewing podcast. What are you going to talk about sewing for a half hour once a week? Like, cool, I love it. I'm here for it.
I know. And I tell people too, like, if anything else, you could just put my podcast on as noise to fall asleep to. So I'm sure that's where a number of downloads probably go, actually.
It's just a bunch of like, I would imagine a lot of intelligent people talking about like how the body works.
Yeah, it's dudes talking about science, and then also like the occasional Simpsons joke. And that's actually pretty much the formula for it.
Yeah. PT, sports, physiology, is that with the body physiology?
Yeah. Physiology would be like kind of the organ systems and muscles, tendons, all that kind of stuff.
So it hits that and Simpsons joke.
Oh yeah, we got range, baby.
What was it that made you get into physical therapy?
So I started my first 2 years of college was in mechanical engineering, and after a couple of years at that, I was kind of thinking like, I don't know that I want this to be my entire life course.
Was there a moment for you that made you flip the switch?
I think it was kind of gradual. It was like the first year you're like doing general concepts. And so I was like, all right, yeah, we'll wait till we get to the good stuff then. And then the second year is like, all right, first year's like a little bit more mechanical engineering and a little more.
Right.
And as it went, I was kind of like, I'm not bad at this stuff because I'm good at math and science. I just don't feel like this is what I want to do for 40 years. So fortunately,
Yeah.
I caught that in the second year of school instead of any later than that.
After.
Yeah,
I know,
right.
like, some people are like, they're 4 years in and then they switch. And it's like, damn it,
Yeah,
I gotta start all over again. So you caught
I
it
know.
quick.
Yeah,
So
and
been a physical therapist since you said 2016, 2017?
2017. Yeah, so after I kind of switched into like a pre-PT major, and then went to Upstate Medical in Syracuse and graduated in 2017 there.
How do you like? Is it like what you expected it was going to be?
Yeah, I would say, despite not actually working in like the PT setting right now, it's gotten me to where I am, and I wouldn't have done anything different other than like if I had known I wanted to be in PT before going to college, pick like an exercise science major. But yeah, I would say I learned quite a bit being in an outpatient sports and orthopedic setting for about 4 years. So I was practicing in Ithaca, New York, for about 3 years at a private practice, where I was developing a pretty good relationship with like the local running and triathlon community. So I was seeing a lot of endurance athletes there. Kind of continuing to specialize in like running medicine and treating the lower extremity, and then went to University of Rochester for a sports residency. And in physical therapy, sports residencies are kind of like optional post-professional programs. It's not like in an MD program where you have to do a residency like right after you graduate. So that was kind of like a 1 year, it's almost like a master class in athletic training, which is kind of an entirely different healthcare field that PTs don't really get that much experience with. So the like, I think the common delineation I usually use is like athletic trainers are really good at managing the injury exactly when it happens and then triaging them to send them to where they need to be. Physical therapists are pretty good at kind of like the meat and potatoes of the rehab. Like, here's what you need to do to get this thing stronger, to get back to where it is.
Right.
Strength and conditioning coaches are like, yeah, we usually pick you up after you're injured now to get you back to full performance. So all those three fields kind of like they blend into each other.
Right.
You know, they're separate entities, but that's what the sports residency program is kind of better at. Like, hey, you PT who's not good or have never experienced like, you know, managing an emergency injury, do this for a year, and to some extent,
to kind of force you out of like your comfort zone.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And also
sure.
learn like a whole different area that you're not really like versed in.
Yeah, when you're in a clinic, like an ambulatory clinic setting, like aside from if somebody passes out and you need to call 911, like that's usually the extent to like emergency response that you're covering. But as soon as you start to get thrown into covering American football and wrestling, which is a fantastic sport to cover, because if you start to just like kind of look away for a second, somebody's going to dislocate a shoulder or have a bloody nose.
Oh, right.
So
right.
It just forces you to just like be on the whole time.
So even within those three different like areas, there's also like specializations, right? Like like focusing on football only or hockey or wrestling.
Yeah, so the and like a lot of folks, there aren't formal specializations for like sport specific things. There are in physical therapy, there a bunch of different categories that you can get board certified specialized in. So the track that I went down was getting board certified in sports. So the sports physical therapist is kind of like that's who you want to see if you're rehabbing a sports injury, which is a little confusing because there are also orthopedic specialized therapists, and orthopedic specialists just mean like you're the specialist at ambulatory orthopedics, and athletes are also ambulatory orthopedic patients. So there's some overlap with that, but the sports specialty also kind of gets into like a little bit more of the emergency response coverage, and then more of the return to sport testing. So once somebody's done with rehab, how do you actually know that they're ready to go back to sport, which is also a particular interest of mine.
Yeah, that's like knowing how the body works is very interesting, because I've only seen this side, the physical therapy, the sports therapy, once when I sprained my ankle playing football, But to your point, like the place that I was going for physical therapy just is not like a sports place. It was like a more of a SOS, but like you when I would go there my appointment, I'd look around, there'd be a lot of like 75-year-old people who are like trying to pull a rope and like trying to get like, basic use of their body. And here is like a 17-year-old kid doing ski jumps from one side
Yeah.
to another, like it's just a
Yeah.
totally different vibe.
Yeah, and I will say most clinics in most parts of the country do look like that, because the insurance model kind of forces a clinic to be like, hey, we can't really discriminate. Like, we gotta just get patients in
Yeah.
the door right now. There is the common cash pay model, which exists in bigger markets usually, which kind of is like you don't go through insurance, you just pay for either rehab or performance or both. Most of the therapists there are both strength coaches and physical therapists, so it's kind of like a performance therapy is
Yeah.
the nickname of it. Those are the settings where it's like, oh, you walk in, it looks like a gym. There's squat racks, there's turf and sleds to push and all that kind of stuff. Those are the fun ones, but they don't tend to service people of a lower socioeconomic status that can't afford that type of rehab
It's
or
expensive.
right. Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Wow.
it's a tough model, and it's a tough position that the profession is in right now anyway, because the actual amount of reimbursement that PTs get by the dollar has decreased since the 90s, and that's not accounting for inflation. So insurance
Right.
companies used to pay PTs a lot more, and now they don't anymore. That kind of
Yeah,
changes the
that was
landscape.
the issue with mine. When I messed up my ankle, I was supposed to go, it was like 3 days a week, and I was 17 working, like part-time, full-time gig, sometimes full-time hours, sometimes part-time. And insurance didn't cover it. And it was like $50 a pop to go see him. And I was like, God, I don't know if I could spend $150 a week to do these exercises. I'm like, please help me.
I
Let me do
know.
these exercises at home,
Yeah, and the therapist then, like, their plan of care should account for what's the context of the patient, how many times can they afford to come in, all that kind of stuff. And then
Right.
there's that extra thing in the corner, which is the insurance company. It's kind of like the moon in Majora's Mask that's gradually getting closer and closer to
Yeah.
Earth. And
Yeah.
then on day 3 they cut you off.
Right. Do most people in sports therapy, physical therapy, are they like roll their eyes at insurance, like they find it to be more harm than it is good?
The clinicians or the patients? Actually, for both, the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
It's like
Because I didn't like I had one friend of mine who's a nurse, and she is like, insurance sometimes makes more harm than good with some
yeah.
situations, and like having to tell somebody that something's not covered and that breaks
Yeah,
the bank is always like a really hard conversation, you know.
definitely. The area that's hardest is probably with ACL rehab. So when
Oh,
someone tears an ACL and has an ACL reconstruction, they're pretty much signed on for 9 months of rehab, and
oh,
9 months is even on the short end of when an athlete should return back to sport after that injury. But I mean, they get 20 visits, and you have to strategically think about how you're going to plan 20 visits over the course of a 9-month span. And
wow.
most of the time what happens is you run out, and then if you can get somebody to pay out of pocket to come back a couple times to do some extra testing, that's great. But then there's this other whole period of time where, like, I might check in with you once every 2 weeks. So I really hope that you're good at like going to the gym and doing your thing without
Right. It's
supervision. Like,
left up to trust, right?
yeah, yeah, it's tough. And then, like, there's a pretty sizable re-injury rate after that, and that's a really, like, sport altering injury. So
Yeah, that's when you say ACL, MCL, there's a couple guys at the gym who've had theirs reconstructed, and it just sounds like an absolute, like they're, like you said, they're out 9 months to a year,
yeah,
and that's best case. And when they come back, they never feel 100% until, I honestly, it feels like a couple of years after, when they feel
yeah. I
like they're
usually tell
totally ready
people
to rock.
expect 2 years until you feel like you're back to where you were previously. Like, 9 months is just the safe, like, by the time 9 months hits, that's the earliest safe return. And then that first 3 months after that, you're kind of like, in this weird zone of trusting your knee again. And then the first season that you play, you will just kind of be like less productive than you were, with obvious exceptions. But giving people that like expectation, setting expectations through a rehab that course that long is very important. But
I
yeah,
feel like
that one sucks.
expectations, any career field is like super important, even more so probably in the sports rehab, because you really have to. There's a good element of trust that is kind of like lined up between the relationship, you and the patient, you know?
Yeah, that's so in PT and in a lot of probably a lot of musculoskeletal medicine, there's this thing called therapeutic alliance, which is very fascinating. It probably accounts for about 50% of the reason why somebody gets better. And it's basically just the relationship that you establish from client to practitioner. Because you think like if you didn't have a good relationship with the person that you were working with, would you be able to get the full effect out of the things that they're telling you to do? Probably not. I mean, I'm sure there are situations where like somebody really hates their therapist but gets better anyway. But yeah, most of the time is that like building a strong therapeutic alliance that helps them buy into the thing that you're pushing. And you know, the thing that you're pushing could actually be wrong. For all I know, I've done plenty of wrong things, but people still get better anyway. And so it kind of falls in this umbrella of non-specific treatment effects, which a popular one that a lot of people know about, the placebo effect, also falls under that umbrella. Those two things are a little bit different. Not as so. A contextual treatment effect is something that actually has some plausibility. We just can't explain it. And the placebo effect is, this has no plausibility for why it would work whatsoever, but people get better as a result. So both through a similar mechanism, we would assume.
We were talking about the MCL, ACL. I was going to ask you, what do you think is like borderline, like the worst injury, just in terms of like length of recovery that somebody could get, an athlete could get?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to say like a multi-ligament knee injury that also includes a meniscus or some kind of cartilage injury. Cartilage injuries are really, really tough to get back from, because you might be able to get through the rest of your sporting career, but 10 years down the road, it's going to look pretty gnarly. So yeah, like kind of a combined like ACL, meniscus, and cartilage injuries, pretty bad, especially if it involves like the posterolateral corner of the knee, the outside, the LCL. Those tend to be just some like wildly unstable injuries. Outside of the knee, I would say the Achilles tear is a really tough one, because there's some evidence now that it actually might not necessarily need to be repaired if you cast somebody in a certain position and the tendon can come back together. But even if you go non-operative, it's still basically a 2-year long process. It's similar to the ACL, where you get back to sport in 1 year and then you still don't feel like you have power through the leg on that side. Your brain doesn't trust that side for another year. And that's if you're doing the right rehab too. That's all. Yeah. All of these assumptions are if you're actually doing the right rehab, which is
and actually doing the rehab, right?
Yeah.
Like
it's not time alone. Yeah. That's a huge thing, is like, it's not just time alone. Like if you just got a surgery and then didn't rehab it, you would not be any better off than if you didn't get the surgery at all. I think a lot of people don't grasp that concept that much. Sometimes a surgery can take away pain-related things, but not very often, because a lot of pain-related things may not necessarily be structural, like, oh, there's a tear and we fixed it in origin. It might be more like neural sensitivity, and cutting something open doesn't change sensitivity. At least not in a good way anyway.
Right. Is there one sport that's like the most associated with those really dangerous injuries?
Yeah, American football is pretty up there as far as like multi-ligament knee injuries and Achilles tears. The thing with the Achilles is that it usually doesn't happen until somebody is mid to late 20s and 30s. So usually you'll see, like in the professional sense, older professional athletes, it'll tend to happen more for them. And that's kind of like that's a bookend to the career anyway at that point.
When you say older athletes, what age range are you talking about? Because
I just had this conversation. Yeah. In professional sports, that's usually late 20s into 30s.
Isn't that crazy?
Right.
Dude,
Yeah,
that's so wild. It's
it
so
is.
wild that that's,
Yeah.
like, late stage of your career is,
Yeah,
like,
well, and then
early
because then you have,
early 30s.
right, because then you have masters athletics, which starts in the 40s. Sometimes, like, there are certain groups that consider masters athletes, like 35 and up or 30 and up, but traditionally 40 and up is considered masters athletics. And in most professional sports, I mean, you're retired by the time you hit that age.
Right. Yeah, no, it's so funny how sports age is like, "Oh, he's 32. He's at the end of his
Just
career." Like,
yeah.
especially in MMA, like, that's always
Oh,
big. It's
yeah.
like, right when you hit, like, 35, they're like, "He's getting real old. When is he gonna retire?"
Yeah,
You
just
know?
like they're completely disposable, like
Yeah, I know. It's the worst, it's the worst. When you have put, like, a lot of focus into, like, running and running science, right? I'm looking through your Instagram and I'm like, I honestly try to read one of those articles that you post, but I'm a little dumb and I don't understand half the words that are on the post.
Yeah,
So,
no,
but it looks like it has to do with running.
yeah, so a good amount of what I do is in running medicine. So I'm involved with a group in the American Academy of Sports PT that puts out a lot of running content. Um, so from kind of like that standpoint, it was always an area that I was interested in, area that I like to participate in. Running tends to be one of those sports where you get injured quite a bit. It's
Mhm.
it's a sport where you just like you do one thing and you do a high volume of it. Therefore, it shouldn't surprise anybody that it comes along with a high rate of overuse injuries. So that's a fun group to work with because they're very like a lot of them are very numbers driven, and that's kind of how I roll as a clinician anyway. Like setting
Well, you were
somebody
also
up.
in track and field too in high school, if I remember
Yep. Yeah.
correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I ran club in college. Definitely was not fast enough to run D1 at Binghamton. So,
Well, I mean,
um,
at least you're working with people that are like your people. Like, it's in, like, a really cool niche that you like.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's easy to talk, you're speaking the same language. You're talking about, tempo runs and all that garbage. Um, Running shoes, just spouting off about them. But yeah, that's it's always a fun area to work with. I feel like a lot of athletes when they retire from or retire when they're in their late 30s and they retire
Li
from
Yeah.
their from team sports, cutting sports like basketball and soccer, like a good way to continue to stay healthy and participate in a sport as you age is running. And it's one that tends to be, people gravitate towards it because it's low equipment. You get
Just need a
shoes,
pair
you
of
get
shoes.
shorts. Yeah.
Yep.
You can get out the door and get back home. Like it's a pretty condensed time frame. I mean, not to offend the cyclists out there, but it takes like 2 or 3 times as long to cycle as it does run.
Yeah, yeah.
But,
Yep.
yeah,
To each
it's
his
a
own.
and, it's a huge, you know, growing sport throughout the world too. So it's something that like you can find in pretty much every country, which is fascinating.
Yeah, and it's very simple. Like, you just have to throw on a pair of shoes and, like, you could literally get a good workout in, like, 20 minutes, you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
you just
with you
run.
working with runners is now that, like, these many years of, like, track and field, is there anything that you're learning now that you wish you would have done back in high school or college?
Oh, easily, yeah.
Yeah. Like what?
Um, yeah, I mean, like, as a young runner, I wasn't tracking my training load, like, at all. I was just running, and I would be like, "Oh, some days I run and not some days I don't," and maybe it works into the schedule and maybe it doesn't. And, I mean, once I got to college and I was kind of running on my own, that's where it was more like, "Oh, what am I even doing here?" At least when you're on a team in high school, like your training load is kind of calculated for you. I guess
Mhm.
I probably one of the things that almost all runners need to do is actually take their easy runs a little bit easier, or like their easy days should be a little easier, and their hard days then can rightfully be a little bit harder. But
How do you
um,
know if your easy day is easy enough?
You could use some kind of heart rate measure. You could use kind of even just like a rating of perceived exertion. So a 0 to 10 scale of like, how hard do I think this is? Most training runs. So there's kind of this like rule of thumb, which is very, you could change it depending on what area you're training for. But the rule of thumb is like 80% of your weekly volume should be pretty easy, and 20% should be hard. And so if I'm running 30 miles in a week, like 6 of those miles could be relatively hard, and 24 should be pretty easy.
Okay.
And that kind of goes back to like this concept of there was some research on this in endurance athletes. I think it also included cross country skiers. But if you try to push that intensity ratio a little bit higher than that, you don't get that much better, but you get that much closer to burnout or like potentially injuring yourself. Now there's a ton of confounders because there are a ton of things that go into why somebody gets injured in the first place.
For sure.
But for a sport that we really think one of the key performance indicators is how much can you do per week and for how long can you sustain that without interruption. It makes sense that you would actually want to just err on the conservative side of doing a little bit less. But that's really hard to convince people because you have to like intentionally slow them down.
Like people who like to work out, who enjoy what they do, is vastly different than somebody who's like very uninterested in sports. Like you take something that somebody really loves and then say you have to put it on a shelf for a little bit to recover. It's tough. It's really tough for people.
Definitely. And that's why there's a huge mental health component to sports rehab too, because you're taking somebody's, not only their regular routine, but in some cases their identity. They identify as a ice hockey player, and now they can't play ice hockey. So what are they doing right now? And their main vessel for like mental health. So somebody runs 6 hours a week, and that's like their time to just be out there doing the thing that they like, and that helps to keep them grounded. And now they can't do that. Like now we got 2 problems. Now you have this injury that's obviously hurting, but you also are now lacking the outlet to be able to like manage your mental health, and it's going to be really hard to rehab an injury if you don't kind of do something about that too.
About mental health on top of your physical.
Yep.
It was really interesting when everything got shut down. The gym shut down too, Taika, and I couldn't train forever. And I know it was the first time in my life I realized I had a direct connection towards like my overall mental health and my physical health. And I don't think I ever had that realization, because even when I was in school, it was like, playing basketball with your friends, or you're playing football with your friends, or you're like, I was always doing something. But to like go literally like, man, before COVID, before Little Man, I was training like 4 or 5 days a week, a couple hours a day. And it was taken away from me. And I noticed, and I was getting like snappier. I was like really quick to anger at times, and like not like myself. It's like you want a Snickers bar? Like you're not, you're not acting yourself.
You just need a Snickers. No, totally. I mean I've heard so many stories of that same concept of just like, COVID sucked for a number of reasons.
Yeah, it was weird because like we were having Ashton at that time, and it was like we were also trying to like figure out how to be parents at the same time, like all this freaking what's going to happen with the pandemic. And then but I learned like a lot of interesting things about myself as a person during that, because that was when I realized like how important like those kind of activities are to my mental state overall. And I don't think many people put much thought into, why does Stephanie love volleyball? That's her outlet. And she goes and does. She gets to unplug for a little bit and not have to think about stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely would not want to be a parent during the beginning of COVID. That sounds like a nightmare.
It was weird. It was just like it was kind of like, it's weird to say it was kind of a blessing in disguise almost. Like it was like, because we had 2 weeks together before we were parents, like everything shut down. We couldn't go to work anymore, and it was just her and I for like 2 weeks. And then we had Ashton, and then it was scary, no doubt. And it was weird, like none of the grandparents could really see Ashton.
Yeah,
but, like, we were also like not working, so we were like sitting at home and like we weren't sleeping, because you have a baby, you don't really sleep for the first 6 months, so it's like,
it's a good point.
it was like the world was on pause while like Brittany and I were trying to figure our shit out. So it was like, it was
Yeah.
kind of nice, but it was also
That's
like really,
interesting, actually. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
But
different.
like I like without COVID, I would not have learned like how important some type of physical thing
Yeah,
for me. Like it for me, it's I think I need at least like 3 to 4 hours a week of just
yeah,
like whatever
definitely.
it is of just like some kind of workout, some kettlebells, martial arts, something. Do you try to fit like a goal time every day in your head for like a physical for like a run?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it kind of fluctuates based on what I'm specifically training for. I if I was in like a regular routine, I'd probably have like a longer run over the weekend, try to get to the track for a track workout once earlier in the week, get a couple of other runs throughout the week, and then a couple of days for strength training. But the kind of just like craziness of my schedule means, oh, I got a lunch break right now. All right, let me get a quick run in and then come back, slam some food, and then keep on with the rest of the day. Or like, all right, it's the end of the day here. Let me get my workout in, since conveniently I work in gyms. So
Yeah,
that's the commute to the gym is now no longer much of an issue.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I think it's kind of it's escalated into just like finding the time to do it whenever I can, like survival mode, which is not optimal for training, but is optimal enough for my mental health that
yeah.
I make it work, definitely. And I realized that like I'm actually probably going to continue, like the busier and busier I get through my career, it's not going to get better. Like I just need
Right,
to continue doing this and
right.
just maintain survival mode.
Yeah, that's gonna be one of the interesting things, at least. Like I would feel like you are a very structured person and you would have like that you would be the type of person to be like, I have my 30-minute run blocked out for the day. But there's also something to be said, like if you don't have that stuff written down, you just you're in a flow, Jason. You've done it for so long. I mean, you've had like your routine now for since college you were running, like you know what the hell you're doing. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. Well, knowing what I'm doing and can my body handle the stress that I'm putting on it are definitely two different things.
Yeah, yeah. Does you had mentioned a heart rate monitor, and I remember a long time ago, I don't know, hopefully this is not false, but your heart rate, if you could track your heart rate monitor and you get so comfortable reading that number that you can start to pick up like when your body needs to rest. Is that was that a thing? I remember like it
Oh,
was
like
big in
heart rate
wrestling.
variability.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so heart rate variability is like it's a measure of how much, it's kind of a weird concept. So your heart beats, you have like a beats per minute, right? But that when you see like the actual beats per minute, that's just an average of how often it's beating throughout
Mhm.
1 minute. But it actually doesn't beat like, oh, it's like once every second on the second. There's like a little bit of variability to it. So it'll be like boom, boom, boom. And the amount of actual variability is thought to be a good measure of like how someone's responding to stress. So if
Uh,
you're in a really good state and you're like, okay, cool, I can take on the stress, your heart rate will have more variability because it can actually manage the ability to do that. But if you're in a high stress state and you're not recovered, your heart just goes into this like mechanical, like pretty consistent. Yeah, there's no variability between these beats. It's not responding well to the external
mhm.
stimulus that's causing it to do that. That kind of that research, I still am not. I'm not super like. Um, I'm not ready to buy in fully on like whether we should use that to predict things, to make
Yeah.
decisions based on that. And like a lot of my job right now is to use numbers to inform decision making, and so that actually says a lot. Uh,
Yeah.
because yeah, it's not, it hasn't been shown to be any better than just asking somebody, how do you feel today? Um,
Mhm.
as long as they're honest, which that's a whole different thing.
Is there any
Um,
benefit to keeping track of your heart rate?
Heart rate for the purposes of knowing what training zone you're in, I do think that has merit. And so like um, going back to when I said 80% of your, rule of thumb, 80% of your week should be in a low intensity zone and 20% can be higher than that. Usually the marker that I'll use is once you get to about 80% of your heart rate max, everything below that, you can kind of block that off as that's your easy zone. Everything above 80%, now that's your like quote unquote hard mileage for the week. So really, if somebody wanted to know if they were in their easy zone, if they're just going out for an average run, you would just wear a heart rate monitor and then get that feedback after the fact. You would need to know what your heart rate max is, which you could do through a few unpleasant tests, or you could, because the 220 minus age estimate is really actually not super accurate.
It's not like it's not like borderline upper level is 160 beats per minute and above. Like that zone is different for everybody.
Yeah, it's everybody's heart rate max is different, even if they're the same age. So there's like a lot of fluctuation with that. I could say like players on my team, a lot of them were the same age, and there was a range from the high 180s to the low 200s. So that range alone, just of guys in their like
200s,
early 20s. Yeah, we had a guy who's 22 and his heart rate max was 207. So
Jesus, I've been grappling, and I bought a chest monitor, a polar heart rate monitor. One of the guys at my gym, he was grappling with like a watch on, right? And he was like, "It's cool, like I get to see what my heart rate is," but he's like, "It gets in the way of things, and it's kind of annoying."
Yeah.
So I bought one of those for like $50, just like a little bra strap that goes underneath my boob and keeps track of my heart rate. And it's been really cool to just kind of track where I'm at during the rounds. And it's like not only jujitsu, I can do that like when I lift weights, and if I don't want to have the watch in the way, And I have not been able to get to 200 beats per minute.
No, I mean
that's crazy, dude.
That's a very high amount.
That dude's probably
and the chest strap is actually the most accurate way that we have to measure it in the field. The ones that use the, I forget what the actual term for it is, like photo something through the wrist. Those are less accurate than the chest strap is.
Interesting. Yeah, and I love it. I also like I'm a numbers, not, I don't know, like I like to see the numbers on my like facts about my body. Like when I get my physical done, I like to know what the numbers are when I get my blood work done. And it's just really cool to be like, okay, so for hour and a half workout, it also like tracks the because like when you grapple somebody for say like 5 minutes, my heart rate is never like fully at 170. It's
right.
Like there's like those peaks and valleys as you roll. So it's really cool being able to roll and be like, holy shit, my heart rate got up to 198 and I almost had a heart attack, I guess, today. Because in the moment I never think about it. I'm just like, push through it. You're almost done. Timer's almost done. done.
And I mean, that's the high intensity, that type of martial arts is high intensity enough to really get you to like pretty close to your heart rate max. I mean, the test that I'll usually do with people, if they really want to know, it's not super pleasant, but you start off on a treadmill at 5 miles per hour, and then you kind of just go through that for about 3 minutes. Each stage is about 3 minutes, and then you bump up 0.5 mile per hour and 2.5% grade until they can't go anymore. And at the time that they bail off the treadmill, they're usually pretty close to heart rate max, if not a couple beats around that. But it also depends on like how deep somebody can dig into the pain cave. Cause it's like, if you're like, I don't like this, then obviously you're not going to get to heart rate max. But if you're like, no, I'm ready to just like take myself to a dark place, then you can get to heart rate max that way.
And I arguably think that cardio is like 60% mental. I feel like a big part of it is your mental state.
There's a really, really fascinating book called Endure by Alex Hutchinson.
See, dude, this is why I want to talk to you, because I knew you'd be able to like pull out a cool statistics.
Yeah, so this is a great book. I listened to it on audiobook a while back, like while I was working out, and it's like a lot of different stories about the process of the brain in endurance based things. So then he brings up some examples of like people who don't seem to have that like switch that tells them to stop and like go to complete exhaustion, or these like British cross country skiers that tried to traverse Antarctica and like froze to death while they were skiing and stuff.
Savages.
Yeah, just like crazy stuff. But there's a lot of theories about it. We don't really know, but we know that like there is a huge mental component, and the perception of like how close am I to being done is really big in being able to get somebody to do something.
Yeah.
One of the stories, the anecdotes that he puts out, which was really fun, is they did this study on cyclists, and they had them like just pedal to exhaustion, just like as much, basically a wind gate test, like as much wattage as they could for as long as they could. And once they were at complete exhaustion, like you're sure you cannot go any further, they offered them $100 to keep going, and every single one of them were able to continue on for like at least 10 or 15 seconds.
Knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. That's so like when I hear that story, I'm thinking like immediately is like jujitsu for me, because it's like we have one Sundays like advanced open mat. We're all like higher level belts, grapple for 12 rounds, and they're everybody's tough rounds, and like knowing how much is left is what gets me through the really tough, because then I'm like, what am I at? Like I get done, I'm like, oh, 2 more rounds. Okay, I can do this. But if there was no clock, if there was no timer, I would be going batshit crazy.
Yeah.
Not knowing what is left. And it's like, dude, it's so mental. It's so like part of it is just like shutting off that switch.
So, I try to manipulate this with my players. Like sometimes I won't tell them the number of sprints that we're doing, and other times I will. And they can always figure out a way around it, because if you don't tell somebody how many you're going to do, they're going to pace themselves. They're just like going to kind of play it conservative. But if you do tell them how many they're going to do, they're still going to pace themselves, and they're just only going to go hard on the last couple.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know that there's a huge like perception of when the end is to be able to pace yourself component. I don't know how you tap into it or you manipulate it.
That was gonna be my next question, was like, how do you ever help somebody try to shut off that part of their brain and just be like, push through it and go
well, the
farther,
worst thing that you can do to somebody is tell them it's the last one and then actually have it not be the last one. So I don't do that anymore.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's tough because everybody is motivated in a different way. Some people don't need any extrinsic motivation whatsoever. They have as much like intrinsic motivation as they need, and they're able to just get it done. Other people are the exact opposite, and they need somebody just like towing them the whole way. So that's probably one of those, like, similar to different learning preferences, like what kind of motivational preferences do you need? And then
does that come into a factor when you start working with somebody? Is it like one of the things you're trying to think of like what makes Cory motivated so I can make sure he's engaged in our workouts?
Yeah, I pretty much from a rehab standpoint, I always offer people like, here's the bronze plan, the silver plan, and then the gold plan. And the bronze plan is like, I'm going to tell you what you need to do, and you can pretty much do it on your own. You can check in with me if you need, like that kind of stuff, to give you more autonomy, all the way up to the gold plan, where it's like, if you want me to just take full control over this thing, and then you come and see me or check in with me like multiple times a week, let's do it that way, because I want this to be the kind of thing that works best for you. I don't care either way, because this is about what you need. Obviously it's easier to give a bunch of people the bronze plan and then go out into the world. But PTs often over treat and they do that gold plan too much too, because there are a lot of people that probably don't need as much of that, like, come see me 3 times a week, as maybe they just need to, like, here's the plan day 1. Why don't you come check in with me in 2 weeks once you've kind of like gotten through that first stage? And then maybe, like, if there's a certain point of the stages that you're getting stuck at, maybe we can, do a little bit more there. But yeah, I think it just kind of goes to like, as simple as asking somebody what they feel like they need. Yeah. And if they don't know, then I'll usually kind of err on the side of like, all right, I'll shoulder a little bit more of this, then give you a little bit more of the motivation, just to make sure that you're checked in here.
It's interesting to see like how everybody has different motivating factors for education, or like learning or whatever different situations, right? They always have different motivating factors, in how like you communicate to one person is how I would never communicate to another. Like
Yeah.
coaching. We had one of our guys fight last night, and he's a really good guy. He's a good fighter, but you got to give him like confidence. You got to show that you are impressed with him, right? Because if you don't, then it affects his mental state. But I know
Yeah.
if I take somebody else and Jeff, I love Jeff to pieces, but he loves when you insult him, because that just fires him up and that gets him kicking harder. But I can't do that with somebody else. I can't tell you your kick sucks. That's not an effective way to communicate with everybody. But for
Oh
Jeff,
yeah.
it works because he's a monster.
That's awesome. I mean, that's like that is a really good demonstration too of why it's so hard to research social sciences. Like you're talking
Yeah.
about all of the different intricacies of being an individual human, and then like, oh, let's get 15 of them in a study and then average what happens. Like there's
Yeah.
no way that kind of stuff is we're what we end up doing with human research is we've got a completely heterogeneous sample of 15 or 20 people, and then we're just averaging that out and seeing what we get out of it. So it's no wonder why sometimes you're just like, yeah, didn't show anything.
Is
Yeah,
there
it's really
anything that
tough.
you've seen that's really surprised you in your career?
From a research standpoint, or just kind of
Uh,
like,
we'll do it both. What if you got one for research?
yeah, I mean, from a research standpoint, I think the thing that the more you dig into it, the more you realize that when in doubt, like the null hypothesis rules. Most of the time, things are not significant, and we as humans want them to be significant, and so we try to like make every little spin we can to think like, oh, the reason that p-value is less than 0.05 is because this must be the case. And most of the time, it's like things may happen that are just random noise. They just happened randomly, and we always want to try to figure out like what was the reason for that thing happening, when it could just be, well, it was actually just random, the reason that we found that thing.
Right.
That's actually like the more you dig into the research, the more you see that, and you just kind of start to think like, I guess nothing matters. But
Nothing makes sense.
yeah, nothing makes sense. I think from like a what have I learned recently standpoint, um, so one of my roles with Rochester, New York FC right now is I'm their sport performance coach, and half of that is basically the sports science side of things of analyzing all of their GPS data. The other half is the day-to-day interface of seeing the guys, warming them up on the pitch, helping out with drills, actually programming and doing the strength conditioning with them on the side. The analyzing the data bit has been really big for me, because you similar to kind of what I was just saying about seeing a lot of random noise. There's so much stuff that you get out of it, so much information that always kind of ends up boiling down to like, this is pretty. If you take a step back, like you look at the simplest things and you use the eye test of watching them, the information that we get doesn't really tell us that much more under most cases. So you see like load management is really popular in professional sports right now, and everybody's tracked up with GPSs and heart rate monitors. And
What load? Oh, like how much you can handle?
yeah, training load is kind of like the name of basically how much are you how much is your body undergoing over a given period. So when you
Right.
see like training load management, oftentimes now it's used as like, oh, that player is sitting, and then the reason instead of getting a DNP is or DNP coach's decision, now it's DNP load management. It's we're seeing a lot of these numbers, and it still doesn't seem to really be any better than just like, yeah, we talked to them, we had an honest conversation about how they were feeling, we have quantified how much they were supposed to be running in practice, and our training progressions were not stupid. So we didn't have them double their training load week after week. Like I think in actually seeing it and sifting through the data and doing it myself, it doesn't. It's not this like magic like number that just tells you, oh yeah, that guy, he's got to take a rest. Like you kind of see a lot of people purporting that to be the case.
Right. Yeah, it's a weird sports and anything in like physical physiology. It's always really like it's hard to pinpoint it. There's just so many factors and there's so much like you said, too many random things that happen. Placebo effects can't be explained sometimes. Why
Yeah.
your mind can completely heal you from a sugar pill and not the real Tylenol. You know, it's a very weird. The human body is super strange.
It's wild. I mean, you always kind of have to assume when something happens, like what are all of the possible explanations for that, for why that happens that way? Like, yeah, number one is like because I'm awesome and I had like the best training plan ever for them, and then that's why they got better. Number two is like, well, they actually might have just been able to get better anyway, and I was just kind of like there as it happened. So they didn't get better because of me; they got better in spite of me.
Right.
Yeah,
So you
it's
work with Rochester FC, right?
yeah. So they used to be the Rochester Rhinos for years, rebranded in a different league. So now they're RNYFC, Rochester New York FC, in the MLS Next Pro League. So it's basically
Oh,
the,
really?
the developmental league for the MLS.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's
That is
been
pretty
really
cool. I
fun.
didn't even realize. So what is with them? What does a day look like for you when you're working with them?
Yeah, so usually get to the pitch like hour and a half before training starts. Guys will start to trickle in. A lot of them will they'll go into the locker room and then kind of trickle in for treatment with the athletic trainer. In that time, I drop off all the GPS equipment. So as part of their practice gear, they have this little like half bra thing that the GPS unit goes in behind them, and that's what tracks their distance and like movements on the pitch.
Does it
So
also
they
do
all,
heart rate and stuff?
oh yeah, they put like a whole polar heart rate monitor on
Oh,
underneath, and
so
it
you're checking
connects.
everything on them.
Yeah, it connects to the GPS unit. So then later in the day, when I upload all those to my computer, it's I get like all of the information under that pod.
So when
Um,
you're in front of that computer, like freaking Neo, and all the
oh
numbers are
yeah,
downloading, what are you looking like? Is there a certain number you're trying to avoid, or like what are you trying to decipher?
the computer exploding.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just like it's
Yeah,
like the meme of Zach
yeah,
Galifianakis, like all the like numbers flying around his face.
yeah. And then there's like smoke.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have this like USB splitter that's split 30 ways, and I plug all the units in, and takes about 10 minutes to upload everything. And then you just get like the raw data of the session. And sometimes you need to filter, like cut out certain parts of it because maybe one of the pods they forgot to turn the pod off, and then it drove home in my car. And then usually the pods are actually pretty good about not, like they know that if I'm driving at 65 miles an hour, it's not a player running at that speed.
Yeah. Right.
But there'll be this long, like, oh yeah, the pod was on for 8 hours, therefore that's 8 hours of awake time for the player. So you filter out garbage numbers, and then I'll generate a report to the coaching staff that'll include what I think are the most important things for a coach to know, and those things are just general distance of the session, so combined walking and running distance, high speed running distance, so everything above 7 meters per second. And that number is pretty much straight out of the sprinting literature. So a lot of the research on this stuff, like they consider 7 meters per second is like the high speed running mark. Some studies
Is
will
that
use 90.
specific to soccer?
It's a lot of field sports. So
Okay.
soccer, rugby, Australian rules football. Most of the research is done on those three sports. And so yeah, like the obvious issue is if somebody did a bunch of sprints at like 9.5 meters per second and somebody else was at like 7.1 meters per second, they would have the same high speed running distance,
Right.
which obviously that's a different amount of stress on the body. But that's where
Yeah.
you see like if you try to dig deeper and deeper on these things, it's going to take forever just to get through a single session that you're diving into.
Yeah,
So I like those two things, distance and high speed running distance. I do also like the composite number that the GPS unit gives you. The GPS is also an accelerometer, so every time it moves, it knows what direction XYZ it's moving in, and it counts all of those things. And it puts out this number called player load, which is just the total sum of all X, Y, and Z acceleration movements, and then it's normalized so that the number isn't in like the hundreds of thousands. That number gives you an idea of like how many specific actions somebody made, because the GPS can't really tell you that. And you can see their heat map from a GPS, but you can't see the fine-tuned movements that an accelerometer gives you. And that number kind of gives you an idea of how much somebody moved. But again, the big limitation is somebody could push you forward and that would count as a 1. Or you could accelerate your own body forward, and that would also count as a 1. So, like, it doesn't tell you what caused the movement; it just tells you that movement occurred. Yeah.
Right.
And then I do use them for top speed. Also, that actually is one of the things that I use most, I'd say. And I also have, so with all these systems, like you've got the live apps that you can see the stuff happening during a session. So if I'm doing like an individual session with a guy on the side who's coming back from an injury, he's like he's done with like rehab, I guess, but he's not quite ready to rejoin the full session. I like to use the top speed number to basically say like, all right, today, if you just got out there and started sprinting, what's the fastest that you could run comfortably? And how close was that to your pre-injury top speed? So having all these numbers does help with like, if somebody does go on to be injured, you knew what their previous healthy self looked like. So you know what they need to get back to, which I think is one of the biggest benefits of having that stuff.
Man, you're like a Swiss Army knife almost to them. It's like you're about physical, like their training, like their workouts, right? Strength and conditioning you dabble into. You're trying to catch and prevent injuries. You're trying to recover people from injuries. Do you ever deal with like, I don't know if this is part of your job or if this is another complete different department, but if like somebody blows their ankle out mid game, is that you running on and like trying to?
That's the athletic trainer. Yeah.
That's the athletic trainer. Okay.
And that is a really tough job in soccer, actually. So you see a lot of diving in soccer. A lot of people falling to the ground as if they were shot point blank.
Yes.
And in the league that I'm in right now, they instated a rule as kind of like a test to see how it goes, that if the athletic trainer does need to come out, then you need to get off the field for 2 minutes. And that's big, because if there's no consequence to like diving, then people hit the ground, they call on the trainer runs out. Suddenly you're eating up several minutes and like giving the rest of your team a break. So leagues understand that, and they're trying to crack down on that in different ways. This is
that honestly makes me happy, because I think that's like one of the barriers for people liking soccer is like there's endless amounts of videos and clips of a soccer player, dude. And I'm Portuguese. When I was able to walk, my grandfather told me I had to play soccer. So I've played soccer, but I've even been like, bro, why are you falling down? Why do you feel like you got shot? I didn't even touch you. It's a weird play. It's a weird dance.
It is. And it's, I have to say, once they instated the rule, it got a lot better in our league. And it was not popular because, we have a, old school Portuguese coaching staff. Our head coach and assistant coach are Portuguese, and they're like, this isn't football. Like, but yeah, it's a culture that's ingrained in the sport too. And I think a lot of it has to do with it's not a sport where you have timeouts. So it's like, it's a continuous running sport. Therefore, it's not like you could just take a timeout and get guys a water break and talk to the team. So then you have to get clever about how that stuff happens. And that's why you see a lot of diving in soccer. Or one of the reasons. Anyway.
They're playing the game. They know if they get the penalty and they're just outside the box, then that's a shot. You know what I mean? Like,
you are told by your coach to take a dive if there's any sort of contact inside the box. If there's any contact and you don't hit the ground, you're probably going to get chewed out afterwards.
Yeah. That's so funny. What now? Do you think like a lot of the injuries that you're dealing with, are they all over the board, or are they really concentrated with like one certain area?
Yeah, so this was something that I tracked throughout the season. We did, I mean, the typically the knee, the hip, and the ankle, like the three main
Because you're
epicenters.
running,
Yeah,
just
all lower extremity.
absolutely getting
Yeah.
pounded from running all the time.
Most of the, so I mean, you see quad strains, hamstring strains, hip pain of various origins, and that's a whole confusing thing in sports medicine that really is. It's actually, as a quick aside here, athletic hip pain really hasn't been figured out, and it hasn't really been like that well uncovered until the last 20 years or so, which is
Yeah,
crazy because people have definitely had athletic hip pain before 20 years ago.
yeah,
So,
right, right.
um,
They just
yeah,
never did the research on it. Like this,
it's such a tough area because certain structures in the hip can mask themselves as others. So hip joint
Mhm.
pain can refer into the hip flexor, it can refer into the groin, it can refer into the side of the hip. So then if you see like, oh, that person has hip flexor pain, like oftentimes a hip flexor strain is misdiagnosed, or
Mhm.
rather hip pain is misdiagnosed as a hip flexor strain because the hip joint has so many different sources of that. And then there can
The hip
just be
joint's gotta
like,
be the most complex
it
joint.
is, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to diagnose, and I would say even harder to treat because once it's pissed off, it's like, yeah, we got to really scale back on a lot of these things that are bothering it, and those things include kicking and running.
Oh,
So,
well, that's the both things you do
yeah,
in soccer.
yeah.
So you can't do your sport anymore.
Yeah, right. So yeah, like the hip, the thigh muscle strains, those are kind of the acute ones that you see. And then kind of a smattering of like different types of knee pain. MCL sprains are pretty common, whether it's contact or indirect, or kind of like indirect where somebody would get hit and then their foot would land in a weird position. Um, the MCL is actually not a terrible ligament to sprain because it heals itself. So unless you like completely tear your MCL, the one on the inside of your knee, that will tend to heal up. But it can kind of be a tough injury to rehab in season because every time you kick the ball, it still gets stressed a
Still
little bit.
tweaks. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then ankle sprains and Achilles type stuff that tends to happen throughout the season. Like you're never going to be able to prevent
Makes
ankle
sense.
sprains. You
Yeah.
can, especially a primary ankle sprain. I should say if somebody sprains their ankle once, then there's some evidence that taping it and bracing it and doing a lot of proprioceptive exercise can help prevent another one. But yeah, most of the time you're just kind of opening the floodgate once you sprain an ankle.
Yeah, and that's how I broke or chipped my ankle playing football, and then the other ankle was from soccer. And it
Yeah.
was like the same. It was the same. It was just on the other side of my foot, and it's the like when I was playing soccer, that was the most common was people's ankles getting messed up from just running, and then your feet would just give out, or someone would like
Yeah.
slide tackle in, and or someone would take the ball and he zigged when he should have zagged.
Yeah. Yeah, most of the time it's that either contact, somebody slides into you, or
Right,
you've stepped on somebody's foot and then roll it over something. Like, yeah,
right.
no one's going to be able to prevent that.
Now, last question I have for you, Jason, is since you got licensed, has the number of people that that you're friends with, family with, has it increased the amount of people who've come up to you and said, Jason, I got this thing going on with my neck.
Yeah.
I can't turn it like this way. What do you think's going on?
I do get the casual family consults, and I'm always just like, if I do give you the advice, are you gonna listen to it? Like,
Yeah.
do I need can you make this worth my time right now,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or should I just refer you to a PT in your area?
Yes, I know.
And
I always
honestly,
feel so bad, dude. There's one guy at the gym, Darius. I love Darius. He's the salt of the earth. And when I hear someone come up to him and is like, Darius, my like calf muscles like really tight, when I move it a certain way, and he's like, do you have any pain? Like he just goes through the motions, like he goes through his questionnaire that he has.
yeah,
And I'm just like, Darius, you are Godspeed, man. You're just it's like, are you even
Yeah.
going to the doctor? And like 9 times out of 10, they're like, no, I just figured I'd ask you. It's like, oh, you poor thing. Like, I feel like you guys just get bombarded with questions and you're like, oh,
Yeah, I mean, for family and friends, like I just do it. If it's like
yeah,
if it's any more fringe than that, then usually I'll just be like, if you want, we can set up a consult, but like I
right,
don't want to kind of injustice this condition by giving you like off the cuff advice if it's not,
right.
if
If it's
it's
not,
not
you did not spending, an hour looking at data on their
right.
wrist and GPS tracking on them, like it's harder to decipher and make an educated decision on how they should treat
Yeah,
it.
like the worst thing that I would that like the I would never wanna, like, assume that it's something just based on how common something is, give somebody
Right,
advice, and then have them do that and have it either not work or, like, make things worse. That's
right, right.
just you're just better off not doing that.
Yeah. Dude, thank you. I feel like I learned a lot from this conversation, and this was great. Thank you. I really
Yeah,
appreciate your time,
absolutely,
dude.
man. I
Uh,
appreciate you reaching out. This was fun.
yeah, I Mike was right. It was this was a really cool, enlightening conversation. Uh, the PT Podcast Network. I think you even have a sports edition too on that
Yep.
podcast,
Yeah.
right?
So PT Podcast Sports Edition, that's one that's mostly like sports PT interview based. And then I have a second one, which is PT Inquest. That's the one that's more like Journal Club, nerdy, fall asleep to based.
Oh, you're awesome. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate you, and I'm gonna end this call, and then you're gonna diagnose my wrist that hurts.
Sounds good. Unless you want to do it on air.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Cory Cast. I really appreciate the time that you spent listening and even listening to the full episode to get you to this point. I just want to say I'm just so appreciative and so thankful that I have so much love and support for these episodes. If you want to be a guest on this podcast, reach out to me. I'm always looking for new people. Let's talk about what you're passionate about. Let's talk about your hobbies. Let's give you a positive platform to talk about the things that matter to you. Do me a favor, make sure you hit subscribe, like, follow, leave a review of the podcast. All those little things will help this podcast grow. Because without you guys, there is no podcast. And I am just so grateful that you're taking the time to listen to it today. Thank you so much.